Hey, hello. So I'm going to go through the Genesis reveals we had. I did a reaction video a while back, but now we've had a bit of time, so I thought I'd just ramble on a few things and maybe give off some ideas on things that you could use these cards for. So we'll start off with Orange Witch Valencia. Orange Witch Valencia has a lot of things going for it. It's an 8k base, so you can swing under compared to the old one, which is a 7k, which is a weakness, but you've got now the new heals, so the new heals can help you inflict damage yourself if that becomes an issue. The first skill was basically a main phase Soul Blast. If you Soul Blast during main phase, you can recycle one card from your drop zone back to your soul and then another one back into your deck, which is so handy. You can basically prevent deck out in a way, obviously only by one card, but it helps a nice little bit in a deck like Genesis sometimes. I mean, it's better than nothing. And one of the things you can put back is a cheeky over trigger, the one-off, because you may sometimes find as a Genesis player you've been soul charging your deck, and you may have found, oh, my over trigger's gone now, but you can always just soul blast it out and then shove it back in from your drop zone. So yeah, be mindful as well, because Orange Witch Valencia is limited to main phase, so you need to make sure you're playing enough main phase soul blasters if you're going to make use of that. Or maybe your Vanguard might be a main phase soul blaster, but if you're then going to the premium format, you may have less opportunity to do that if you're relying on your strides, so having some rear guards based around soul blasting could be useful. Obviously in this set you've got Fortuna, which is a main phase soul blast, which is built for. But going back to the over trigger situation, as I was saying, if you happen to soul touch your over trigger, but then you use Fortuna to stack your deck while soul blasting over trigger, you're going to miss your chance to stack the over trigger. So even then, if you're playing the premium and using Fortuna, it's always good still to have a rear guard that can do main phase soul blasting, because then you can use it beforehand to trigger oranges, and then you can return the over trigger, and then you can use Fortuna to stack your deck after. Just bear in mind that oranges does stack to the bottom, so obviously you need to have enough soul, which can happen, but it's not always going to work because it does depend on your hand in the day, and it is a main phase skill, so you can't even make use of its own soul charge ability. But what you can also do, if that doesn't work, you can always use a skill to shuffle your deck. Take for example the Grade 3 Searcher. So you could increase your chances of finding an over trigger. Well, it doesn't technically increase chances, but it increases it beyond 0. So because now you're shuffling your deck, so the over trigger can get mixed in. In Premium, you can always set up for Ultima with that as well, if you wanted to go for that route. And other than that, there is then the second skill. Oh no, another thing that's important. First skill, it does return a card from your drops into the soul, so obviously that's good with any sort of key pieces. Kamal, maybe, you could do it with Taro, you could do it with some of the old witch cards if you're playing the witch subclass, and Gelja, anything that's useful really. There are other cards that do return cards from drop to soul, or move cards from hand to soul as well, but I think Orange, one of the nice things is it not only does it do it from the soul, like for example Spilga does. Spilga's the grade 0 that lets you soul charge a card from your hand, which activates from your soul. But then there's also just the fact that Orange Witch can also be used very flexibly, because it doesn't just rely on the hand and the job, but it also can be used anytime from your soul. So if you just happen to soul charge it, it's already a utility. Now you just gotta call something that can soul blast and you're good. But as for the second skill, that skill is very handy because you can draw with it obviously, and of course it is a neg one because you do have to move that and another card in the same column. Obviously Kamar is a +1 in herself, that's suicides, and then you obviously can neg with that to make it not feel like a minus, but besides the Kamar combo that it's designed for, it works with anything else, so you can still make use. Like if you're playing witches actually in Premium, you could always do something like this. You call a unit, maybe you can call Kamal, maybe something else that's a witch. You have your column with orange as a booster. You do your attack, right? And then you attack with Snake Witch Mint or Clove. Clove is the witch stride, by the way. The one that's on attack, give everything that's a witch 10k power, and you throw in Legion gains crit. You could even use Clove. You Soul Blast 6, and then you can Soul Blast some witches. Because you would have had oranges and a unit in front of it, you would have already made use of that and gained back a card, rather than just straight up hard retiring and calling over. Because what you can do in Witches, obviously, as you may have heard, the classic Witch strategy is to call out cards like the old Chamomile, which is replaced now by Cardamom, or Melissa, the old one, which has now been replaced by Onion, because Onion and Cardamom are basically just superior versions that gain 2k, but require you playing a Witch deck. So you could always just call in that now vacant column, and in that case you haven't actually lost out in advantage. So there is that play as well. And then you've also just got the whole thing with Orange Witch being a Mirage card, so even if it's not about, you know, not making such hard losses on calling over, you can even just get rid of a unit and then make it so that your opponent can only attack the Vanguard while you're swinging and rushing, which is a classic good strategy to have access to. So that's another consideration for Orange Witch. There is another one as well, but I'll get to that after. For now, let's move on to Chamomile. Chamomile is very handy. Mirage card again, just like Orange's. So that's always useful, being able to attack and then get rid of something. I think though the downside is that Chamomile is a grade 2 ride that you'll be trying to pull off, and sometimes you're not really going to have Chamomile on your soul in the early game, or be able to also at the same time simultaneously Soul Blast a card from your soul to then trigger the condition for Chamomile. But what would be useful is if somehow you're able to pull both those things off, which you can do, it is possible in Genesis, but obviously you're kind of extending yourself there to try and build into a particular situation. What you can do is you can always do the early game rush with Chamomile, and then of course you get rid of it, because I think early game is obviously a bit more useful, but then by turn 3 onwards the Mirage players, they can diminish a little bit in value. They still have their own place, but because it's a force deck that you're playing, which most grade 3s are going to be 13k base, if you're worried about damage denial, well, they'll probably be able to damage deny you anyway without striding, so if they're an Axel or Protect deck, or if they're playing an old G-era boss. So that's another thing that's always going to be a possibility, thing to consider. But other than that, it's an interesting card, and you can sort of prevent your opponent from hitting your targets. I think it's better in V Premium than it is in Premium, but then there is a place for it in Premium anyway. So with V Premium, you do have the whole case of there not being that many multi-attack choices besides, like, for example, the CO Yggdrasil combo. So in a way it doesn't really feel like you're losing out on much if you're calling Chamomile from your soul for an attack, because you won't really go into the multi-attacks anyway. But another thing as well to consider is that if you're playing a Fenrir deck, you can always just call out that Chamomile, and then when you attack with Fenrir, after your Chamomile kills itself, or use oranges with Chamomile, you could always then just use Fenrir's ability to call a unit back out. Something not very strong, most likely, because a lot of times you're not calling strong cards out anyway in the first place. So you just throw something out, do a little poke at your opponent. So that's another way you can use it as well in V Premium. I think Chamomile is pretty decent in V Premium, pretty good. In Premium, I think it gets a bit narrower, of course, because there are a lot of other options out there, and I think in a lot of decks people just don't have the space or time for Chamomile, and there are just other options, and the way the game plays out is a bit different to some of the ways V Premium might play out. So that's always a thing as well. But the Witch subclan is pretty cool with Chamomile. There are issues with the new grade 3, because the new grade 3 does incentivize you to call witches from your hand. So you do have the issue of, for example, if you want to try and reduce Soul Blast costs and you just want to play your deck into calling witches, then you may find yourself just calling Chamomile over a unit for no reason, or not. Well, you would have a reason, which is gain a bit of power maybe, but even then, the Force grade 3, her skill gives power. It's an act skill, by the way. It gives 10k to all your sorcerers and witches, so that's in a way most likely going to be counterproductive when you use Chamile's skill. So there is a bit of a clash in that regard. But then again, it's not like you're always going to be able to call out a whole board of witches just like that, so that's still something that may be worth appreciating. But even with the Force grade 3 aside, there are other cards. So Clove, as I mentioned earlier, and obviously Snake Witch Mint, another obvious example. They can make use of Chamomile because they're continuous gain 10k, and it's dungeon battle phase. So you can always just swing with that Kalmar, and then you can then use the on attacks and then give 10k to your new self units, and you don't really feel like you've done much of a clash. Another thing to bear in mind though is with Kalmar, you do have to Soul Blast your main phase to trigger it, so obviously Clove and Mince can't do that, so that would require you playing something else, like for example Fixus. But it wouldn't really work quite as often with cards like Clove, because Clove is a grade 4. Fixus, so what it does is it's Can Blast 1, and you check top 4, look for a Witch, and then you can add to your hand, and then you stack the rest of on your deck. But it can be a Soul Blast 1 if your grade is the same as the opponent. And the reason why it's weird with Stride is because when you're striding you're on grade 4, and during your turn your opponent is going to be on grade 3 a lot of times, because most people don't play grade 4 Vanguards continuously. Usually that's a Stride that comes out. Maybe you go against a high-landed premier player and it will work, but otherwise Fixus would be more useful with Mint. But if you're looking to then rely on Clove, then you'd probably have to consider looking for some sort of Soul Blast choice that you can do during the main phase. And that there are all kinds of cards you can always pick between to run if you want to consider it. There may even be more that come out later on, so that's always a consideration if you're building witches as a sub-clan. And other than that, there is the general benefit with Kamal and oranges. So Kamal and oranges are witches, and on the topic of the witch sub-clan, there is a critical trigger called Sharoma, and what it does is you can put it back into your deck, shuffle it, draw a card, check the top 3 of your deck, and then you can put one card among them into your soul, the rest drops it. Of course the drop zone thing was designed for Legion, so just be careful because you can accelerate yourself in the deck out. But the Mulligan ability is quite handy, and it also soul charges selectively from the top 3, which can be handy as well for setting up your Soul Blast Witch combos, or Kalmar actually for that matter. So that's always a good card. But even if you're not playing the Witch subclan, you can just hybrid the Orange and Kalmar engine into another Genesis deck, and you can just play that old school Witch critical Sharoma just to have the crit that can go back to deck and still net you some advantages. Then lastly we have Fortuna. So Fortuna is the grade 3 boss card of the set. That card, very interesting. What it can do is it can stack a set number of cards based on how many cards you start to Soul Blast. But you have to counter blast as well. So one of the things to look out for is basically making sure you've got enough soul if you want to have an entire deck stacked. Obviously you can soul charge cards that you maybe want to have still in your deck. For example, the one-off Overtrigger, which there is a workaround, as mentioned earlier, Orange Witch, and of course coupled with some Axe main phase Soul Blasters, you can get it back into your deck in time for the Fortuna skill. And another card you're going to have to consider playing with that as well is obviously Kroot, which is being reprinted as well in clan selection. Kroot lets you soul charge for every card you have in your field when you place it. So it's a very, very powerful staple to play in Genesis because it just turbos your deck, and that is what can make Fortuna insane. But another thing you can do as well is if you're playing Premium, you can also stride it to Marduk, so it does have its Marduk synergy because it's the main phase skill, just like Himiko, just like Fenrir, or Origin Deity of Uranus, Origin Deity of Heavenly Light Uranus. So just as some examples. But then with Fortuna, you've got the Count Loss cost, so just be mindful because Marduk is a Count Loss 1 and so is Fortuna. You do technically need 2 Count Blasts if you want to make use of both skills. So that might require you having to fiddle with some really weird lists that play Zazen as a one-off, and then Bobo followed up because Bobo has to be called from hand, and you're not going to get that if you're striding off of Marduk. So it's a very awkward thing to pull off. Can be quite tricky. So it's more often the case that you're just going to have to rely on the 2 Count Blast if you want to do the Stride and Fortuna. And obviously the Stride is valuable because of Taro, because Taro is a GB1. So I think if your opponent doesn't give you the 2 damage, I think you'll have a lot harder time doing the stronger Fortuna play. Also, Fortuna can, in a way, after you do your massive, insane deck stacking, one of the great things about Fortuna, because as you may know, Marduk is a Soul Blast 6, and obviously you're trying to Soul Blast as much as possible for Fortuna. Fortuna can soul charge for every card in your field on attack. So when you stack your deck, just make sure you have some fodder cards lined up to then soul charge your Fortuna, because if you want to soul blast like pretty much everything and leave yourself with nothing for Marduk, then you can make use of Fortuna to then soul charge on attack, and then you can then soul blast it as well for Marduk. And then we've also got what else? There's a third skill, which is the force marker that can be gained. So yeah, you can play Fortuna defensively if you want to, stack an over trigger or some heal triggers, survive your opponent's turn 3 or whatnot, and then after that you can follow on with at least a few force markers next time. So that's always a bit handy, and obviously because of Fortuna being what it is, you can guarantee your triggers, provided your opponent isn't just damage denying you. And that takes us back to Kalmar, why Kalmar is in a way very useful, and Orange Witch as well in a Fortuna deck for both Premium and V Premium, but more specific V Premium, because Premium I think there's going to be a lot of more popular choices out there besides that. But in V Premium as well, you've got the Orange Witch, you've got Chamomile, so you can make it so that Fortuna's your only target, and then your opponent has no choice but to set the Vanguard if they want to have drive checks, but then they know that you're going to take a damage. But then again, it is a 13k base, and it's a force deck, so if they really want to be cheeky, play a Protect or Axle, and then just swing under, and then put the triggers elsewhere. Other than that, pretty cool support, really fun. I can't wait to play around with it more. I have tried Fortuna without Kalmar. I've not tested Kalmar yet, but there are ideas I do have for it. But Oranges and Fortuna are pretty decent. Fortuna I think is not as good if you're on 1 damage, but if you're on 2 damage it's quite a good deck. It's quite up there. Orange Witch, very handy. These cards can be very useful for a long time as well. They do seem to have quite a bit of shelf life on them, just like with the Oracle cards. So they are very high quality support cards. I think overall Genesis is very good support set, and I'm looking forward to seeing more clan sets in the future. So anyway, I hope that leaves some food for thought for any of you Genesis players out there, and I think with that I'll call it a day and take care. See ya, bye.